I'd like to invite all the speakers to please come to the front of the room so that we can open up for discussion with you and with the online audience. And for the online audience, I'd like to ask, please submit your questions in the platforms that you are in, and we will capture them here and direct them to the speakers. I will now do my musical act and just walk around to that side of the room while you collect your thoughts. And as you do so, we will have mics coming to you. So please raise your hands. We'd like to collect 3 or 4 questions if we can. Please tell us your name and institution and keep your questions or comments brief. And we collect them as we go for the first round.
My name's Brian Greenberg. Wanted to thank all the presenters. Really compelling case for the kinds of priorities you set out. What I wanted to ask you is your suggestions about incorporating some of the softer, if you will, sciences into the kinds of integrated work that you propose to do here. Like everyone in the room, my pulse quickens when I hear systems approaches invoked, but they're really complex, and my sense is that if you believe in systems approaches, that still from these presentations and priorities, we're still fairly siloed. So I'm thinking about things, just the types of things that are either binding constraints or critical success factors for the agenda that you set out, which for me are things like gender role and relationship transformations, land inheritance, and let's see, norm change, critical for driving demand changes around nutrition in areas such as nutrition. So education, all of these areas are critical to the success of the kinds of more economic and technical engineering agenda that you lay out here. The alliances that you're able to form with the social scientists and the social change agents who work from that kind of perspective are obviously going to be critical. And of course, I'm sure you've given this some thought, but it was not accented in your presentations, and I wonder what thoughts you might have about changing the traditional paradigm for your disciplines about what interdisciplinary collaboration means.
Ryan, thank you very much. That is a set of very interesting, difficult, complex issues that you raise. Let me, before I come to the panel, and I hope that you are taking notes if you need to, let me see if there are other comments in the room and take 1 or 2 of those. Let me start with the gentleman here, and there should be a mic coming your way, and then I will come to Eugenio next.
Thank you. I'm Paul Gannett. I'm with the ACDI VOCA. I also applaud the insight to have systems approaches, more complex problems, more complex solutions required. And following on Brian's comment, I would urge the separate and joint academies to involve the civil society structure as a change agent. Policy change doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens when it's demanded and justified by societies. So I would urge that addition, as a systems approach is taken, to identify the change agents, particularly in civil society.
Thank you very much. And let me go next to Eugenio.
And we saw each other was at the S20 in Rosario. I had the opportunity of addressing that group. Thank you very much. I can see that from the S20 in Rosario, you sharpen all the work that you've done before. 2 comments, quick comments. One is, I think it's crucial. One of the points that you referred to is what exactly is the healthy diet? There is still a lot of debates about that, so that would help a lot in all the rest of the analysis backward. And then the second point is, what we are trying to work also at DIFPRI are the employment implications of all that, because it's not only the sustainability or the healthy diet. With a co-author, we sort of calculated that about half of the employment at the world level is related to the food systems. You start with agriculture, transportation, processing, retail, the street vendors. You put all that together, it's almost half of the employment at the world level. If you wanted to restructure a diet because of the health and environmental implication, then you will have to consider also all the employment implication if you have any comment on that.
Eugenio, thank you very much. Let me turn to the panel, and would you like to go this way? Paul, would you like to begin first and walk down?
Okay, I'll briefly reply. The last point made, I think is a very good point. And when I talk about a healthy diet, I don't just mean healthy for the consumer, but healthy for the economy as well. And I think it's a very good point that the food industry worldwide employs a huge number of people, and then employment needs to be taken into account. These diets also need to be affordable. So the economic imperative is very important. So we need to know what diets are in the sense of physiological health. Well, they also need to be affordable, they need to be available, and they need to be sustainable in terms of ongoing employment and economies. And that's why I made the point there's a complex issue to define just what it is the diet should be going forward for different parts of the world. And if I come back to the other 2 points, they're also well made. I did in my presentation just say very briefly that there may be many factors that impede food and nutrition security, and they may not necessarily be science and technology factors. They may be other impediments. And when we talk about a systems analysis, I'm at least referring to a very high level systems analysis that would take into account the so-called softer sciences and would look at the sociological, economic, and wider impacts of what we need to do going forward. Science and technology will definitely be there. There will be a science agenda, but there may be a lot of other factors that are very, very important that also need to be tackled. So when I talk about developing this blueprint, I'm talking about doing that work at a high levels systems analysis level to come up with a blueprint that will look at all of those factors, some of which will be science and technology. Let's not just rush off and assume the answer is genetic engineering, maybe a whole lot of other things.
Thank you very much, Paul. Michael, would you like to comment on any of the questions that were raised?
Yeah, I'll pick up on the soft science comment as well. I think there really aren't any soft sciences today. This is something that we thought about 50 years ago, but today addressing the big picture questions in a systems framework requires all domains of knowledge. And the other point that I'd like to agree with Paul on is that there are no single factor solutions. In the past, we've tended to want to look at technical solutions, partly because of historical precedent, because the Green Revolution was so successful in the 1960s and changed the landscape for much of the world in terms of food availability. But there are no single factor solutions on the horizon for the issues that face us in the 21st century, and they're going to have to be dealt with as a coherent, integrated system. And the challenge for us is to be able to explain that in a way that policymakers can grasp it, because it's really easy to go in and say, I have the solution, but that's not really the case today. So I'll end my comments there.
Thank you, Michael. Cheryl, would you like to make any comments?
Yeah, thank you. On the systems side, each report deals with the issue of transdisciplinarity, and it was one of the major themes. And part of the joy of working with a team is that we came from so many different domains, different regions and different domains. It wasn't something that we focused on today, but certainly it is there. And part of the core for these dialogue platforms is to broaden the engagement so that science is not something that's done in laboratories and universities, but that actually you bring that to the table. And it's at those policy platforms that you'll find the engagement with the social activists. And so it's an empowering process for the whole of society if we're able to take those science discussions into a far more participatory component. Particularly the African report deals with our heritage of education is very siloed, and that students need exposure to those different components if you want to create somebody with the toolkit necessary to deal with the complexity. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Joachim?
Just two quick comments. regarding soft science and interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, I think systems approach requires building a lot more sophisticated models. Revisiting our style of socioeconomic modeling with behavior and political change is, I think, what's called for. Secondly, on healthy diet, we didn't present the European report, which Robin Fierce, who is in the front line here, had an important hand in. At least in that report, there was a lot of emphasis in the European science community to get into personalized nutrition. Personalized nutrition understands healthy diet in a classification of people and their health and age status and all these complications. Healthy diet definitely is not just a diet that has all the ingredients a normal average person needs. The science around personalized nutrition is only awakening now, and it is relevant for rich and poor people.
Thank you very much, Joachim Walker.
I agree with the comment that social sciences should be incorporated and participate. But this is wishful thinking in my own experiences. I give an example from Europe. Europe, we have the European Academy Science Advisory Council, which exists since 2001. And in this council, we have dealt with GMO. And you know that GMO is a big, big question in Europe, and not in the United States, but it is in Europe. We have tried several times to get social sciences involved and say, you will help us. You have to help us that GMO will be discussed, and GMO will be defined, and GMO, the pro and the con, will be brought to the people. But they have not done it. So when we have now genome editing, right, CRISPR-Cas, we did the same thing. So we tried to get social sciences involved. And this is something to do with their organization or their ideas. I don't know what it is. I believe we have to do it. And you know that ICSU has now merged with the network of social sciences. I'm very happy that they do this. They can develop this, in a constant way. In IAP, we have not done it. But of course, what we did in ESAC was that we picked single colleagues, to help us in our activities and in our development of reports. But in general, I would say it is now something that social science has to bring towards science to us to help to join. So I would say I'm all in favor for it, but so far we have not succeeded to have a successful approach to it.
Thank you very much. If any of our panelists wish to comment at any point, they should also raise their hand so I can see that. But let me first now turn to the online audience. If there are any questions or comments, my colleague Lucy will tell us about the online questions first.
Hi, so we have 5 questions from our online viewers. The first one is from Musa. He asks, what are the techniques that the world envisions to lead these populations to be more resilient, and how do we make these more durable and constant? The second one is from Miriam from Boston, Massachusetts. How have subsidies impacted the efficiency of food security, and how can it be improved through a system-based analysis? Do countries and regions such as Asia and Africa need them? Then from Suraj from Nepal, does the report speak about food quality in high-risk countries of Asia? Food nutrition is one thing, but the quality has been undermined. Looking forward to reading in detail. And last one, Johoro from Bangladesh. How about the food market for perishable products in case of smallholder producer? How can we ensure a sustainable food market engaging all the market actors?
Lucy, thank you so much to you and to all of our online audience. Why don't I come back to the panel, and let me go in the reverse order this time. Walker, is there anything you wish to address at this time?
Skip me. It's not my background.
Okay. I'll move next to you, Joachim. 4 different questions, any of those that you wish to address.
Well,
great that we get questions from around the world. The reports very much address the issues of food quality. That was question number 3, if I counted it properly. And that relates also to the issues of perishable products. There is great opportunity in advanced food processing and quality control, but we critique there's lack of research and lack of implementation on quality control and regulatory regimes, as the world has been supermarketized and has moved towards a lot more processed food. The European report deals, which we have not presented, deals quite a bit with subsidies for agriculture. One of our calls is that subsidies need to be a lot more scrutinized, as especially Europe is entering into a new phase in 2020, next year, to reform its food and agricultural policy and to shift subsidies towards in 2 other directions, especially on quality and nutrition, and secondly on environmental sustainability, rather than standard income transfers.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Thank you. I'll tackle the question on resilience. And this is one of the elements that we did include in the report, and we had quite a lot of discussion on. But we felt that resilience needs to be applied across the entire food system, and that each stage of the system needs to be, the resilience needs to be improved, particularly as uncertainty increases. We need greater access to information. And so I mentioned one of the things we felt is that ICTs could play a big role, but not just in terms of big data in large institutions, but putting that into the hands of farmers and consumers, into the hands of the market people, so that people are able to anticipate where supply and demand are going to go, what prices they're likely to get, distributing information about how to deal with food safety hazards, and for us to be able to understand the patterns of those disease transfers, for example. So there are lots, if we're able to put into the hands of people, identification of pests, for example, we're able to monitor the movement of pests in a far more up-to-date daily reality than what we're able to do now. And you're able to see, as a farmer, it's coming my way, what am I going to do? Able to access information far more rapidly about what pesticides to change to, what techniques and what crops, for example, you should be mixing in order to be able to do that. So the ICT and resilience go hand in hand. And so the techniques are not they're specific to the specific part of the food chain that we're talking about, whether it be production or whether it be storage and packaging of goods. Thank you.
So I'll begin with a comment about resilience. That's been a challenge for agriculture since it was invented, and probably one of the reasons for the invention of agriculture was the ability to store produce, to store seeds and so forth, in order to be protected against bad environmental fluctuations. So humans have been struggling with this issue of resilience and food supply from the beginning of civilization. I think that it's an even bigger problem today for several reasons, one of which is climate change, because the frequency of extreme events and therefore large disruptions to localized agricultural systems is going to be greater, and that will require greater sharing and interconnection, but at the same time we're living in a world environment that is tending to fragment in the political sense, and so the challenge for us is to find ways to cooperate, to provide the sort of insurance that will help ensure our neighbors and people in other countries against disasters that we can predict will happen on an average scale. The other area that struck me was the area of subsidies. Subsidies are, of course, a big issue in the United States, and they have many perverse impacts. One of the other things that they illustrate is the complicated linkages between different sectors. So here, a nice example is subsidies for the production of ethanol. Beginning about 20 years ago, when there were large concerns about fuel supplies, subsidies were introduced for production of maize for ethanol production, and that became very important in the Midwest. And it turns out that when we have presidential elections, the primaries process actually starts in Iowa, which is a big beneficiary of ethanol subsidies. So every presidential candidate, when they travel to Iowa, says, oh, well, we'll keep the subsidies, even though they provide no benefit in terms of energy consumption. And that is a real problem with subsidies. Once introduced, they develop a political support that is hard to change. That's also true, for example, for various other areas of agriculture in the United States. There's a joke about farmers farming the government because of the system of agricultural subsidies. So these are once they're built into the political system, they become extremely difficult to dislodge. And I think that is maybe beyond the power of our science academies.
Thank you, Michael. Paul?
Yes, well, about the quality aspect, the Asian report has a lot to say about dietary quality in all its dimensions, and that is obviously a very important consideration going forward. As I made the point, you cannot just think of calories alone. There's a lot of other factors to take into account in that overall concept of dietary quality. One of the questions asked about what technologies would we recommend, and in the Asian report we do talk about a number of emerging high-level S&T technologies like big data collection and analysis as one example, CRISPR-Cas as another, that are very likely to be part of the solution and should be on any global or regional agenda. But we really advised against being too prescriptive, because I think what needs to occur is these areas where the problems are really going to be found to the greatest extent, we need to look at those farming systems and look within those regions and talk to the people there to really find out what are the impediments, because they're not often what we thought they would be, and then devise a blueprint that's informed by the issues we face rather than some preconceptions. So I think it's good to have high-level technologies that will undoubtedly be useful, but it's equally important to go into the areas where the real problems are going to occur in a major way over the next 20 to 30 years, and really look to see what are the issues we need to address. Then finally, in terms of subsidies, if we're going to have truly sustainable diets, we must factor in externalities and external costs, and we must factor in subsidies and their effect. And I think, once again, there's a lot of preconceptions as to what one will find when one does that. And I've recently been doing some linear programming work using current world food ingredients and current world food prices. And to get the most affordable diet, currently you need to put in quite a lot of animal products, which is sort of going against the current thinking. And in fact, the price by which those animal products needs to fall before they disappear is a very, very large gap. So you've got a lot of movement to put in to the prices of those foods, considerable externality costs, and they'll still be part of an affordable diet. And affordability is just as important as those other properties we've talked about in terms of quality overall. If you can't afford the diet, it's no good at being highly nutritious.
Thank you very much. Let me take one last round of questions and comments in the room. I will begin with Suresh, and then I will go to Astrid and that round over there. And please keep comments, questions brief so we can hear back from our panel.
Thank you, Rajul. Thank you, the panel. Very interesting presentation. Two quick questions.
Introduce yourself.
Suresh Babu from IFPRI, Head of Capacity Strengthening here. The systems approach we talked about, and you just mentioned linear programming, that's the question I was asking. 30 years ago, we were talking about farming systems research, and that's where we brought all the, at least interdisciplinaries within agriculture to work on a farm to solve the problems. And we are again going back to the mixed farming approach, and we evaluated them 30 years ago. And came livelihood approach, came another approach, came another approach. We kind of forgot that we actually started with systems approach to solve the nutrition problems. And we have published quite a bit in the literature on that. So how do we come back to that and understand the systems, at least in the context of food and nutrition problem solving, if not going beyond that, right? One. Second, the problem is the capacity. We are still in the silos, developing PhDs in economics, developing, PhDs in nutrition, and one doesn't try to address the other problem. How do we bring, say, a nutrition policy research as a PhD program? Some tried, so I'm talking about the interdisciplinary faculties themselves coming out of it and doing this. Without that, we are going to talk about interdisciplinary for a long, long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Astrid, you're next.
Thank you very much. Very interesting information. I don't know where to start, but I just maybe take one aspect which I'm working a little bit on right now. I'm working at the World Bank group in the Agricultural Global Practice. So we are looking into the digitalization of the agricultural sector, and the data and new technologies, especially also in the internet area, were coming up. And I think there are a lot of good opportunities now. For example, better helpful farmers. At the World Bank, we have the Ag Observatory, where we can send or offer data on the meteorological situation in different parts of the world, and this information through new startups, for example, can brought much faster to farmers to help them better prepare. But on the other side, there are a lot of risks, and I mean, especially the question how fast farmers are integrated in the systems of access to internet and phones and so on. Does this not create a new problem, adding another layer on the complexity of all these systems?
Thank you very much, Astrid. Pass the mic behind you to Julie Howard.
Hi, thank you. Julie Howard. I'm a senior advisor at Center for Strategic International Studies. So I'm not sure this may be beyond the scope of what's being done by the inner academies. I'm hoping not. But I think we all recognize that some pretty fundamental changes are going to need to be made, both farm level, through the value systems and the way we consume food, in the environment, and the way that agriculture interacts with the environment. So, speaking as an American, I think, I'm not sure right now that our national government is the best audience, for recommendations for big change. Some of the states are. I'm struck by the increasing power of consumers to shift behavior of the private sector and leadership of firms like Walmart. Very surprising to me in reducing packaging waste. So I guess my question is, who's the audience? Who do you see as the main audience? And who do you see as the change drivers that we're going to need for these efforts?
Thank you very much, Julie. And I thought I saw a hand up in the front. Pamela, would you pass the mic to the gentleman?
Hi there, I'm Peter Bolton. I'm a freelance journalist. It seems to me that the Western model, Western diet, Western model of producing food, distributing food, thinking fast food, free trade, supermarkets, factory farming, and so on, has been a catastrophe for humanity, for the planet, for sustainability. There are some efforts in Latin America to resist this model of diet and agriculture, for example, in Bolivia. The President Evo Morales had a law to completely outlaw McDonald's throughout the country, for example, which seems to me to be part of a wider resistance coming from Latin America against globalization, free market capitalism, imperialism, and so on. And I just wanted to see if anyone on the panel had any comments or what their thoughts are about that analysis.
There are super questions around here. I'm also aware of the time, and I'd like to give the panelists a chance to briefly respond. But I believe we have online questions. Let us take one of them. Lucy, if you'd give us one question from the online audience.
Okay, this one is from Patricia, who's from Georgetown University. She asks, the issue of gender is central to transform the food system. How can we work towards a more gender-sensitive framework for food quality and nutrition across regions?
Wonderful question. Thank you so much. Panelists, I would like to ask you, pick the question or questions that you can briefly respond to that you feel most passionate about. And I will go in the reverse order, beginning with Paul and ending with Walker. Thank you. And this is also a moment for you. Any final message you really want to leave with the audience, this is the moment.
Okay, Rachel, I'll pick up on three of them just very quickly. Firstly, the point about the need for transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary approaches. And one of the major recommendations from the Asian report was to form these cross-nation, cross-disciplinary centres of excellence. And they weren't just for research. We foresaw these collaborative centres in research, in education, and in extension, which should never be forgotten. Also very, very important in this context, I think. And they were to be transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary centres of education, research, and extension. So hopefully beginning to get away from that silo effect that's bedeviled our universities, I think, in the past. The second comment about the modern communication, computer, World Wide Web, and the like, that would come out, at least in the Asian context, as part of our recommendation to go into the regions where we know there's going to be problems and undertake a high-level analysis of what are the impediments, and we'll find out whether or not that is the case. Certainly, we did one exercise in that. It was in parts of hill country in India, and surprisingly enough, that wasn't found to be an impediment. They're incredibly technically savvy, but they're very nutritionally poor. So in some places I think it will be, in other places it won't be, but it's part of that idea of identifying what really are the issues rather than presupposing them and then getting a blueprint to put our money in the best possible way to make progress. And then the final one I'll address was the point about the audience, and I think it's a very good comment and question. But the audience for the report is primarily government and government leaders, but also industry leaders. It's also targeted towards scientists and the science academies themselves. And all of the science academies have seen and read the report. They've bought into it, so the reports are cooperative in that sense, and they're authoritative in that sense. They've been peer-reviewed and they've been signed off, so they're in a statement, in my case, of the Asian Academies of Science, and they've been an important audience. But also, the report will be disseminated in various ways to the public. And I agree with the person who said it, that we have to get members of the public to pick up and be passionate and demand change in these areas. I don't know that it will come from government. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, briefly.
Yeah, well, I'd like to also say a word about the who is the audience question, which is a very good question. For us, the primary audience, in our mind, I think, was policymakers. And we designed our report in a way where there was an assessment for every country so that the academy of each country could reach out to its policy-making community based on this well-developed synthesis or assessment. Nevertheless, the policy-making community is only one of of a set of influencers who might change the trajectory of food systems in the future. And as you rightly note, the private sector also has a big role to play. In this era of shareholder value, I think it is harder to get the private sector, at least large companies like Walmart, to also factor in societal responsibility into their view of how they make their investments. But that can change, and this is all a slow process and requires a lot of effort and energy on the part of all of us. The other question I've wanted to say a word about was, are there efforts to resist this Western model? And I thought that was quite interesting. One of the issues about the model that has tended to get propagated around the world is that it's squeezed out diversity, which means that it is inherently less stable. It's more subject to large perturbations from external factors. So things that help create a greater diversity and institutional range in dealing with food issues is of value. And I think the efforts in Latin America are quite interesting and worth observing and following.
Thank you very much. Cheryl?
Just a quick note, there are more phones in Africa than people, so it's data and charging, power to charge them that's more important. On the question on building transdisciplinary programs, the leadership of universities is critical because the leadership needs to set the context to do that. So maybe if we make academic leadership responsible for delivering on the SDGs, maybe we can change some of these.
You okay?
For the time being, I think there are great opportunities of digitization in agriculture, integrating value chains, making information available to smallholders, facilitating efficient mechanization to overcome drudgery in the smallholder sector. So that has a strong gender dimension, but the long-run future, we don't know. There's fascinating work about drones and robotics replacing people in the field, currently mostly in large fields and in livestock production, but that can be scaled down, and the employment effects in agriculture may be quite negative, but I think this is an area of research in which we all need to enter, whether it's in Bangladesh or in the US or in Europe or in Asia. Rajul, you said we could make a point not addressed. I think there is great scope, and that's my point not addressed, great scope for bringing together this work by the Inter-Academy Partnership with the CGIAR. The documents which we have given you a glimpse of touch on the future global research agenda in food, nutrition, and agriculture. It has been initiated from the general understanding by academicians that the food system is broke. It's not delivering. It's not delivering health. It's destroying the environment, and it traps poor people in where they are. And so taking this broad perspective with a lot of detail in these documents as a basic starting point for consultation of the CGIAR, which currently thinks a lot about itself, but it has to think about the world as a whole, and I think there is a scope for future exchange and cooperation.
Can I just add one word?
Let me give the mic to Walker.
Well, I personally cannot comment on these questions because my background is medicine and infectious diseases. But I personally learned a lot by participating in this discussion and seeing that this is possible, that you can bring so many scientists together to work on one issue and one topic. Very interesting, very rewarding, and I admire my colleagues here now, how they have done it and how they have produced this document. My question is, will we have an impact? Can we measure the impact? Can we stir something up which is taken up by others? And since you are a famous institute and doing all these studies all the time, I would have liked you. Can you give us advice how you could, activate, our documents and get, them to distribute it, and that they are accepted and that they are discussed in different environments. If we can achieve this, I think I'm pretty happy, to have done all this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will not dare to summarize this incredibly rich presentations, incredibly rich discussion, including from the audience itself. I think I would simply say to the panel that thank you for coming up with this report at this very fragile time for us all, where the voice of science needs to be heard loud and clearly, and in very diverse locations, in very diverse venues, and to be heard loudly in ways that are accessible to people. And I think that, I hope that the Inter-Academy Partnership will continue to find ways to get the messages of these reports from the countries, regions, globally, out in ways that will actually foster discourse, and picking up on Julie's points, that will actually generate audiences that will themselves participate in the solutions that then are then being propagated. Because I do think it is extremely important that the voice of science is multiplied and amplified in this very important discourse at this time. On that note, I'd like to ask all of you to please join me in appreciating the work of the partnership. Thank you. We encourage you to continue to informally mingle and interact.